Sue Smith sitting in for Aaron Rand, and today we're talking about Oliver Jones. He died yesterday. He was 91 years old. We played a really beautiful piece of Oliver's at the top of the show, Someone to Watch Over Me. He was a consummate musician, and people today are talking about what a gentleman he was as well, like an old school gentleman, but also a gentle man. He was 91 when he died. He had been suffering from an illness for quite some time. And, he was a real part of the fabric of Montreal. He was born in 1934, raised in Little Burgundy, and of course had Oscar Peterson as his mentor. And at one point, performed even with Oscar Peterson. So we're talking a little bit about his legacy today. Eric Alper joins us on the line. He's a publicist and music historian. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you agreed to talk with us. What was your reaction when you heard about the death of Oliver Jones?
Look, I'm not a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. But I absolutely firmly believe that Oliver Jones was put on this earth to play music. Mm-hmm. I mean, from the time he was 3 years old, he can play songs from memory after hearing them once on the radio. He was performing live in front of people at age 5 in the United Church.
Yeah.
He started playing in the clubs at 9 years old. And he was a guy, because he was so nice and so kind and so gentle and such a professional when it came to music and such a love of music, that it kept him going well past, I think, the age where a lot of musicians who didn't find the success maybe that they wanted would have quit. It wasn't really until he was about 50 when he came back to Montreal, kind of to pursue jazz full time, met Jim West from Montreal, who started essentially Just in Time's records for him. And from that moment on, it's wild to read about his history, because that's when it really opened up, giving him so many accolades, and while he was continuing to put the spotlight on other people. And, it's so good to see somebody that is nice kind of get the awards and the recognition when they're here, like the Order of Canada and the Governor General's Award. Sometimes, these people fly under the radar too much and they don't get those accolades. He stuck around long enough to get it, and I'm so happy that he did.
I love the way you describe it as, if I'm reading you correctly, that it was, yes, a career, and he eventually did get success, but it's not like he could do other things because he couldn't do anything else. It just was so much a part of him. That's the impression I get when you talk about him. How did you know him, Eric?
Well, I was doing the publicity for Just in Time's records for a number of years, and even though that he didn't really have a new album, I think since 2003, there were a number of tribute shows, there were a number of one-off shows, and the label probably get really mad for me saying that he was still one of the most popular artists on there for interview requests. It
Right.
seems like if you were a fan of jazz, if you're a fan of blues, if you're a fan of soul, if you have a blog or a podcast or a music magazine, sooner or later you requested to talk to Oliver Jones.
Yeah.
And he was always so generous with his time. I had a chance to do my own interview with him, so I got to ask him all the really geeky questions that I wanted to know. And he was just so touched. This is about maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
He was still blown away that people not only recognized him, but that, like, it just tickled him that he was on a stamp.
Yeah.
The fact that, that people gave him that love back. And look, enough people, I know enough people that work sometimes in music or entertainment where, they think that they are God's gift to mankind. And he absolutely wasn't like that whatsoever. In fact, without him, maybe we don't have somebody like a Diana Krall, who he put the spotlight on at a very, very early stage in her career. So he touched a lot of people.
It's funny. I also was fortunate enough to interview him quite a few times. And back in the day, before COVID, we used to interview everybody in person, so he would come into studio and he was always just, such a kind and really gentle person. But I wonder, you talk about that modesty, and I can't help but wonder how much of that had to do kind of coming up in the shadow of Oscar Peterson, who always was, internationally famous. And of course, Oliver took lessons from Oscar's sister Daisy. I wonder what that relationship was like. I talked to him about it once after I saw them both on stage during the Jazz Fest, and he was very much deferring to Oscar as the really great pianist and not so much himself.
I think you're exactly I think you're right. There are times when in music or entertainment when you are lucky enough to hang out and meet your heroes, and it's another to actually work with them on the level. Yeah. And I don't think Oliver Jones felt this, but I think most people have that kind of feeling of, I don't deserve to be here. What am I doing here? This is so wrong. And I think that's Oliver. I think the fact that he was continually deferring to somebody like Oscar, he knew where Oscar was in the league of performance. And I'm not saying that Oliver wasn't that, but I think he was smart enough to realize that, when you're talking about the great performers of Art Tatum or Errol Garner, like you give them their props and you give them their flowers and you you get to move up with them. I think that kindness and that memory, I think, is from his parents, who moved from Barbados and settled, as you mentioned, in that neighborhood. It would remain central to his identity for the rest of his life. I think he saw a lot of things as a kid and realized just how lucky he was to be able to not only do music, but to play music. I think he understood the word play really, really well.
That's a really interesting distinction. So on that, how do you think he will be remembered musically?
I hope this time next week that he is number one on the streaming chart above Olivia Rodrigo. I think a lot of people are going to be checking him out for the very first time. I think if you're in university, you're probably hearing about him. I think if you're in a music school in high school, I think you're learning about him. I think if you're an adult and you were like, oh, I think I saw him here or at this festival or that festival, or, I like Ray Brown, or I like Hank Jones and Dave Young, and but I may not know him. Or if you're a fan of Tony Bennett and Sarah Vaughan, these are people that he's shared the stage with. And I think those fans of jazz are probably now reading about him and listening to this very segment going, well, if these two people are kind of salivating over his life, then let's figure out what all the fuss is about. And I think it's going to open up to a brand new audience in the next couple of weeks, months, and years ahead.
I hope so, because, right at the top of the show, we played Someone to Watch Over Me. It was really beautiful. Honestly, it gave me goosebumps. But I was really amazed just listening and now watching him. His technical proficiency was amazing, as well as the emotion and everything else.
It was brilliant. I mean, the fact that I think when people started discovering him, it was the way that he played with his phenomenal technique and a hard swinging style that you just don't really hear a lot of today, but you also don't get a lot of popular people in jazz performing that. I think for a lot of jazz artists that are growing up and getting really popular, they're not growing up necessarily with old school jazz like a Tony Bennett or Ella always in their life. They're growing up with a little bit of Spike Lee, with that kind of an influence, or like a pop culture influence with rap in their lives for the first time. So I think that there's a combination of jazz artists performing with the roots, for instance, and I love that, but I also think that there's absolutely a place for somebody like him that kind of built his career based around the African musical traditions and the jazz that he had built his career around.
Absolutely. And hooray if people start listening to that again. Eric, great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, bye.
Hello, Canada.
This is Bryan Adams Radio.
Hosted by Bryan Adams himself.
We'll play a few of mine, a ton of my favorites, and some must-hear behind-the-scenes stories from the world of rock and roll. One thing about doing rock and roll so long is you end up meeting a lot of the people that you admire. Sometimes you even get to work with them.
It's only love, and that's all.
Bryan Adams Radio.
I'm coming back to you.
Now available on the free iHeartRadio app.
Everybody